So we're picking up with this flow chart, step 2, adherence. We covered steps 1 and 5 in the epidemiology lectures. So we're picking up with step 2, adherence. So adherence refers to the attachment of a pathogen to host cells. Attachment not only allows the pathogen to invade the host cells if it's an intracellular pathogen, but it also helps the pathogen resist removal mechanisms. So our immune systems have a number of ways to remove pathogens from the body, but if the pathogen is adhering to the surface of host tissue, it makes it harder to remove them. Adherence requires the participation of microbial surface proteins, which we collectively refer to as adhesins. So any protein on the surface, any molecule on the surface of a pathogen that allows it to adhere to host cells, we will call it an adhesin. Some examples of adhesins we've already looked at in this course are glycocalyx. So remember that sticky substance, that it's a glycoprotein that is secreted by a number of pathogens to either form the capsule or a slime layer. That glycocalyx, because it's sticky, it helps the pathogen adhere to host tissue. It's referred to as an adhesin. Remember, glycocalyx is found in most infections, actually most bacterial infections of the human body. Some famous examples would be UTIs. Pili, remember the sex pili that allow for the transfer of genetic material. They can also be used a little bit for movement through liquid. They also can be adhesins. So microbes can sometimes use the proteins in their pili to adhere to receptors or proteins on the surface of the host cells. Fimbriae, those are those little hair-like extensions that make some bacteria look like burrs. Those are for adhesion, so they're considered a type of adhesin. And even flagella. So flagella are designed for movement, but they can also be used to adhere to host tissue. So adherence requires the participation of adhesins and also host cell receptors. So the protein on the surface of the pathogen has to bind with a protein on the surface of the cell, the host cell. And usually those are going to be receptors. And these are proteins, they're not designed to pick up pathogens, right? They have another function. So the pathogen is binding to a protein that has some different function for the host cell. And we've already talked about this with viruses, but this is true for bacteria too. Protein receptor binding is going to determine host specificity and tissue specificity. So the adhesin on the pathogen is going to match up with some receptor protein on the host cell. Which animal species has that receptor is going to determine host specificity. Which tissue types have that receptor is going to determine tissue specificity. So usually the pathogen is going to attach to tissues at the portal of entry. But if the pathogen travels through the body to another site of infection, they'll have to adhere to other kinds of tissue as well. So for pathogens that spread through droplet transmission, you have to breathe in those droplets. Usually the tissue that's being attached to is respiratory tissue. Okay? And that's going to be different for pathogens that enter through the fecal-oral route. So we have an everyday example of adhesins that we can look at. So you may have heard that you can use cranberry juice to prevent UTIs. UTIs are usually caused by E. coli. So is that true? Well, it is actually. So E. coli have pili, and those pili have proteins that specifically bind to proteins found on urinary tract cells, like bladder cells. And that pili, which now is being used as an adhesin, that binding of the pili or that adhesin to host tissue prevents you from being able to flush the E. coli when you urinate because they're binding to the surface of your urinary tract cells. So when you drink cranberry juice, you metabolize it, and one of the metabolites, one of the derivatives from digesting cranberry juice, actually binds to those pili. So it gunks up E. coli's adhesins, so they no longer have the ability to attach to your urinary tract. And then you can flush them out when you urinate. So if you drink a lot of cranberry juice, not only are you getting a lot of liquid, but you're also getting this metabolite that gunks up their adhesins so they can't adhere to your tissues.